Hello, people of YouTube. How are you? Curtis here from 10 Pound Guilt Trip. Here for another video. This is the one that kind of gets things rolling. Anyway, today's video is a list, but not necessarily like a top 10 list or whatever. It's a list of bands that I really like from the early to mid 90s and beyond, but they kind of got their start in that time frame. Really not a list as far as like what I like better or worse or whatever, with the exception of the very last one I'm going to mention, which you guys can probably guess if you know me at all. The very last one I'm going to mention is my favorite band ever. So number one will be number one. The rest of them are just in any order. So without further ado, let's get to the list. At number 10, we have more of a pop band than rock, Matchbox 20. What can I say? That first album was good. I mean, it was good to me, and it was good to my dad, who likes country music and kind of older rock, you know, like the Eagles and so forth. So the fact that we could put that CD in on road trips or whatever, and everybody was cool, was awesome. So Matchbox 20, definitely on the list. At number 10. And number 9, we have Temple of the Dog, a melding of two of my favorite bands, Pearl Jam and Soundgarden. It was basically the brainchild of Chris Cornell, if I remember right, and Jeff Ament, and let's see, why am I drawing a blank here? Jeff Ament and Stone Gossard. It started out anyway as a tribute album for at least a couple of the songs anyway, or a tribute to Andy Wood, who was the lead singer of Mother Love Bone, which was essentially Pearl Jam before it was Pearl Jam. And he was roommates and really good friends with Chris Cornell. And he died of an overdose, unfortunately. And Chris wrote at least 2 of the songs for him, and then got together with some guys, mainly the guys from what was Mother Love Bone and his own band, Soundgarden, at least some of his own band from Soundgarden, like the drummer, Matt Cameron, and recorded those and decided to make a whole album out of it. Brought in Eddie Vedder for a couple of the tracks, and it's a classic rock album that unfortunately had sad beginnings. At number 8, we have Candlebox. I remember Candlebox after I really first got into rock and roll through Pearl Jam, thanks to my brother. My brother brought home the album, Candlebox's first album, which I think is self-titled. Anyway, I listened to the heck out of it. I thought it was really good. And one of the first songs I ever learned on guitar was Cover Me by them. And so they had to make the list. At number 7, we have hard rocking grunge legends, Allison Chains. I mean, what can you say about Allison Chains that hasn't been said already? Wonderful band, really hard, dark music. Of course, you know, unfortunately, Lane Staley passed away, as did the first bassist, Mike Starr. They both passed away. I know Lane's was drug related. I'm pretty sure Mike's was as well. That's very sad. Allison Chains, like a phoenix rose from the ashes, brought in a new singer. I believe his name is William Duvall. Leave it in the comments if I'm wrong and correct me, please. And he has done a great job. You know, obviously you can't fill Lane's shoes, but he's come as close as you can, I think, to doing that. One of my favorite bands of all time, for sure, Allison Chains. At number 6, we have the Stone Temple Pilots. Cora was the first Stone Temple Pilots album, and it was one of the first albums I bought with my own money, if I remember correctly. A great album, harder than a lot of the other grunge type music out at the time, with the exception of Allison Chains, of course. And you know, I mean, Scott Weiland had his own way of singing and doing things, and I know some people compared them to Pearl Jam or whatever, especially with their second album, Purple. And in Purple, you maybe can kind of see a little bit. To me, they were their own thing, and I really enjoyed them. I know Scott was in and out of the band after a few years, and they tried other singers, and Scott, of course, unfortunately passed away. And I don't know if they're still a band or not. I believe they are trying to carry on. And of course, Chester Bennington from Linkin Park was their singer also for, I think, one album, one short album, and maybe some tours. I don't know. I'm pretty sure some tours, but anyway, or at least one tour. But obviously, Chester also unfortunately passed away. But I think he was already out of the band by that point. But anyway, yeah, it's a good band. I personally like Core, Purple, and their third album better than the rest of them. And unfortunately, I can't remember the name of the third album, as you can tell. My research was a bit lacking, but it's all right. On to, I believe, number 5 on the list. Weezer. Weezer was maybe my first introduction. Well, that's not necessarily entirely true, but they had a more comedic element, and still do, I suppose, to their rock. But it was so good still. Say It Ain't So is just a great song. It's one of my favorite songs to this day. And of course, Buddy Holly's hilarious. I love the video. Uh, the Sweater song, a great song. It's funny. And, I used to rock that album a lot back in high school. Me and my buddies, just listen to it going to school and so forth. It's a good album all the way around. And I really haven't owned a Weezer album since Blue. I still like some of their music, but Blue makes me think of the 90's, the early 90's, and so I had to include Weezer in this list because of that album. Number 4. Ooh. Nirvana. How can you have a top 10 band list from the 90's, early to mid 90's, and not include Nirvana, who, it could be argued, started the whole thing from the Seattle grunge scene. At the very least, they were right there at the tippy top of it to go along with Soundgarden and Pearl Jam, But, I don't listen to Nirvana as much as I should. And it's weird because I've felt for years that I really have some kind of connection with Kurt Cobain. He unfortunately passed away really before I really got into rock and roll. It was like right around the time of his suicide that I started getting into rock. And so unfortunately I missed the up climb when Nirvana just exploded onto the scene. But I definitely, have grown to love and respect them since then. And of course that moves on to Foo Fighters, which I'm a fan. I'm a fan of Foo Fighters as well, although they're not on this list because they were more of a late '90's band, but or started out, in the 2000s. But yeah, you can't have a list like this without including Nirvana, and Kurt Cobain, certainly one of the better lyric writers ever, I think. And his passion was just, it topped so much. That's one reason why I love Eddie Vedder so much, is because he's so passionate, especially on that first album, 10. And Kurt Cobain just, he's got that passion as well. Bush comes in at number 3. Bush was one of my favorites. They were the first rock concert I ever saw. I saw them in Memphis with my girlfriend, who's now my wife. She got her first ever high from that concert. We weren't even smoking weed. But the people all around us were, so the contact high was legit, let me tell you. But that was a great show, and yeah, it was really good. Gavin Rossdale I thought was awesome. The first 2 albums of theirs are my favorite. I like The Signs of Things, their third album, pretty good too, and I really haven't followed them since then. And I know now Gavin, I think, is the only original member left in that band when they try to pick it back up again. So I've really kind of lost touch with them. But as far as the early to mid 90's, you couldn't go wrong with Bush. One of my favorites, like I said, off those first 2 albums. And I listened to Razorblade Suitcase 8,000 million gajillion times when it came out. And I still like to put it on, and the first album as well. So that is number 3, Bush. Number 2, coming right up. Soundgarden comes in at number 2. What can I say about Chris Cornell? He's one of my favorite rock vocalists in general of all time. If it wasn't for my obsession with Eddie Vedder, he might be number 1. As far as passion goes, him and Lane Staley and skill, him and Lane Staley were very similar to each other. My top 3 vocalists, easy, which I might make another list one of these days of top vocalists. But just to put it out there in this song, Eddie Vedder, Chris Cornell, and Lane Staley are the top 3. And you could really switch them around, with the exception of probably Eddie Vedder being number 1 because I'm obsessed with him. But anyway, Chris Cornell was an amazing guy. And while I've always been kind of bummed when celebrities die or people that I look up to die, or I was really bummed when Lane Staley passed on. But I was really struck and hurt when Chris Cornell died. I don't necessarily know why, other than maybe I'm older and he'd been around longer than Lane, because Lane died quite a while ago. And I was still pretty young myself when that happened. But I don't know, it struck me pretty hard. Yeah, it is what it is, but it was a very sad thing. I actually wrote a song about it. Anyway, yeah, Chris Cornell, Soundgarden, just up there, so good. And they really were the pioneers of grunge and coming out of Seattle, the rock scene, because I think they go back, same with Allison Chains, they go back to that, like, 80s. I think Soundgarden even longer than Allison Chains. Go back into the 80s and then early 90s, and of course when Nirvana exploded, and of course Allison Chains' Facelift I think it was Facelift, was a pretty big album in 1990. Once Nevermind came out for Nirvana and 10 came out for Pearl Jam, and then you had Super Unknown come out for Soundgarden, which really just exploded them off the map. That 1991-92 era was so big and just bang, and then Allison Chains, of course, followed up and just kept rolling. And yeah, but Soundgarden, Super Unknown, great album. 2 of my favorite songs off of their album before that, Bad Motorfinger was, Rusty Cage, Outshined, and then another one, Jesus Christ Pose. I love those songs. So, and, they weren't on the more popular albums. And of course, you blow up into Super Unknown and Down on the Upside, and then they unfortunately broke up for a long time, got back together, and then unfortunately Chris died not too long after they reunited, so it didn't keep chug-a-lug-a-lugging like Pearl Jam is, unfortunately. One thing that strikes me is, in Black Hole Sun, Chris wrote that lyric of "No one sings like you anymore." And it really rings home now that he's gone, because nobody really sings like him anymore. Anyway, off to number 1, which is, anybody guess? 10 points to the house of your choice. If you guessed correctly, Pearl Jam. I've told this story before. I'm going to tell it again, at least a brief version. I was a teenager, a fairly young teenager. I had been raised on country music and some 80s rock pop, but mainly country music, right? And never really felt the rock thing. Kinda, not necessarily like it's of the devil kind of thing, but maybe similar to that as a kid growing up. I didn't get it, whatever else. One day in the car with my brother, he played Pearl Jam's 10. Moment changed my life forever. Because of that, if nothing else, Pearl Jam will always be my favorite rock and roll band of all time. So, of course, shout out to my brother Zach Huggins for injecting me into that wonderful world of rock and roll music. And I am a super fan. I could say I don't absolutely love all Pearl Jam songs, but I like and or respect all Pearl Jam songs, even the silly ones, or that seem silly or whatever else. But, they're not silly to Eddie and the boys that wrote the songs. And so, even though some of us may seem like bugs, may seem kind of silly, you know, and even if it's kind of silly, them I obviously don't know their headspace when they were writing these things or now, but maybe they thought they were kind of silly too. Whatever, it doesn't matter. I still respect them. I still like them. You know, some Pearl Jam songs I like more than others. Some Pearl Jam albums I like more than others. But Pearl Jam will always and forever be my favorite rock and roll band. Just like Eddie Vedder will always and forever be my favorite vocalist. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this list. I'll release another video tomorrow talking about my little Gretsch acoustic guitar. So I'll see you then. Bye-bye.